Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
There are few passages in the Christian Bible that have stirred as much mystery, debate, and controversy across time as those found in Revelation 2 verse 9 and 3:9. These verses, wrapped in poetic language and searing accusations, have ignited centuries of theological inquiry, racial identity politics, historical revisionism, and spiritual soul-searching. To truly understand what these cryptic verses mean and who they may be referring to, one must peel back the layers of imperial history, linguistic evolution, biblical interpretation, and suppressed records of ancient migrations and diasporas. The question at the center of this mystery, who are the real Jews, echoes far beyond religion. It cuts into the heart of power, land, birthright, memory, and erasure. The book of Revelation, traditionally ascribed to John of Patmos, was written around 95 AD during a period of brutal Roman repression and upheaval. This era saw the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD, scattering many Israelites into Africa, Arabia, and further east and west. Within the letters to the 7 churches of Asia Minor, 2 key verses stand out like ancient scars. Revelation 2 verse 9 declares, "I know thy works, and tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich, and I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan." Similarly, Revelation 3 verse 9 states, "Behold, I will make them the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews and are not, but do lie." These words raise profound questions. Who are these people falsely claiming to be Jews? Why does the author accuse them of aligning with the synagogue of Satan? And most importantly, who were the true Jews, the ones being persecuted at that time? To decode this, we must journey back thousands of years before John penned Revelation into the ancient kingdoms of Israel and Judah, and then track the dispersion of the Hebrew people across continents. The Hebrew Bible traces the origins of the Israelites to Abraham, a nomadic man from Ur in ancient Mesopotamia. Over centuries, these people formed kingdoms and confederations. However, their political independence ended with successive invasions by Assyrians, Babylonians, Greeks, and Romans. During these periods, many Israelites and Judeans were exiled or fled into Africa and Arabia. Historians such as Rudolf Windsor in From Babylon to Timbuktu argue that large groups of black Jews fled Roman persecution into North and West Africa, where they lived for centuries, assimilating into African cultures yet preserving Hebraic customs. Ancient accounts and archaeological evidence support the presence of Hebraic communities in Africa long before the modern Jewish diaspora of Europe. The Lemba people of southern Africa, for instance, have oral traditions tracing their lineage to Jewish ancestors. Genetic studies published in the American Journal of Human Genetics, 1999, have confirmed that a segment of the Lemba carry a high frequency of the Cohen modal haplotype, a Y chromosome marker common among Jewish priests. Similarly, the Beta Israel of Ethiopia practiced a Hebraic religion for millennia, believing themselves to descend from the tribe of Dan. Their scriptures were written in Ge'ez, their customs closely mirrored the Torah, and they had no knowledge of European rabbinic Judaism until relatively recently. This African Israelite connection challenges the dominant Eurocentric narrative that Judaism only developed and spread from Ashkenazi communities in Central and Eastern Europe. The Ashkenazim, who trace their religious identity through maternal lineage, rose in prominence during the medieval and Renaissance periods, with major centers in Germany, Poland, and Russia. However, Ashkenazi Jews themselves do not claim to be bloodline descendants of the ancient Israelites. Many scholars, including Arthur Kessler in the 13th tribe, have proposed that Ashkenazim are descended from the Khazars, a Turkic people who converted to Judaism in the 8th or 9th century CE. Though Kessler's work remains debated, it reflects the long-standing awareness that religious identity and ethnic lineage often diverged across centuries of conversion, intermarriage, and migration. In Revelation's historical context, this divergence was already taking root. The Jews referred to in Revelation 2 verse 9 and 3:9 were likely elite groups who had gained favor with the Roman Empire, by conforming to imperial religious standards or persecuting Messianic Jewish sections. These false Jews may have represented political opportunists who used religious authority as a mask while undermining the faithful communities of believers who continued to follow the teachings of Yeshua, Jesus, as the promised Messiah. Early followers of Christ saw themselves not as a new religion, but as the fulfillment of ancient Israelite prophecy. Their rejection by the synagogues and the Roman-backed religious elite was more than theological. It was political. It was in this moment of political betrayal that Revelation casts its harshest light. The phrase synagogue of Satan is not a blanket condemnation of Jews, as later anti-Semites would twist it to be. Instead, it's a direct critique of those claiming Jewish authority while acting against the ethical and spiritual tenets of Yahweh. The real Jews, then, were those oppressed believers, likely of Afro-Asiatic descent, scattered across the Near East and North Africa, marginalized yet spiritually rich. These people were living testaments to ancient covenant traditions, bearing the torch of an identity that was in danger of being overwritten by empire. In the centuries that followed, these black Hebrews continued to exist, quietly and often invisibly, across Africa, the Middle East, the Caribbean, and even the Americas. Many enslaved Africans brought to the New World carried oral traditions, names, and spiritual practices that scholars have linked to Hebraic customs. Some communities, like the Gullah Geechee in the U.S. South or the Maroons of Jamaica and Suriname, retained Sabbath observance, dietary laws, and even linguistic traces of Hebrew. In recent decades, movements such as the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem and the Israelite Church of God in Christ have reignited the call to re-examine who the lost tribes really were and why they were deliberately erased from the pages of Western history. Colonial scholarship, influenced by racial ideologies, had long dismissed the idea that dark-skinned people could have had complex religious traditions or ancient Hebrew roots. But historical records tell a different story. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century, noted that many Jews fled into Arabia and Egypt during times of persecution. Ancient Arab historians like al-Yaqubi and al-Masudi recorded the presence of Jewish tribes in Arabia long before Islam. The Quran itself acknowledges Jewish tribes living in Medina during the Prophet Muhammad's lifetime. These were not white Europeans. These were Semitic and often dark-skinned peoples, integrated into the Afro-Asiatic cultural sphere. So, who are the real Jews? The answer is not singular, nor confined to one race or region. But if one seeks the original people of the covenant, the Hebrews of Moses, the Israelites of exile, the Jews of persecution and prophecy, then one must look to the margins of history. Look to the deserts of Arabia, the hills of Ethiopia, the forests of the Congo, the slave ships of the Atlantic, and the stories passed from grandmother to grandchild under the stars of forgotten lands. Revelation 2 verse 9 and 3:9 were not meant to be weapons of hate. They were meant as warnings to remember, to discern, and to restore truth in a world where religious identity had become a currency of power. The real Jews were not necessarily the ones building temples of gold under Roman protection. They were the scattered sheep, the persecuted believers, the ones holding on to sacred knowledge in secret. And today, their descendants walk among us, often unaware of the spiritual inheritance they carry, because centuries of empire, colonialism, and whitewashing have told them they were nobodies. But the prophecy still stands. I know thy works, and tribulation, and poverty, but thou art rich. Because history, like prophecy, waits for rediscovery.